Hey there, welcome to the Sudo Show. This is Brandon. Before we get into our episode around virtualization and containers, I wanted to just do a few housekeeping items. Make sure to go get subscribed to the YouTube channel. I'll be publishing several videos over the next coming days that I've delayed. One of them will be a review on a laptop. The other one will be a series of videos around open source identity management. Really looking forward to getting those out and getting everyone's feedback. And sometime in the podcast that I mentioned, in the previous podcast, I meant to say a previous podcast about virtualization. If you're interested in that, I'll have a link to that episode down below in the show notes. Now I bring you Virtualization Revisited. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitwarden. Bitwarden is the easiest way for individuals, teams, and business organizations to store, share, and sync sensitive data. Bitwarden is an open source password management tool whose feature set rivals any other tool on the market today. Not only is Bitwarden open source, it is regularly audited by security professionals. You can get started for free at bitwarden.com/tux, and plans start at just $10 per year. Thank you to Bitwarden for sponsoring the Sudo Show. This episode of the Sudo Show is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head on over to do.co/tux2022 to get started with a $100 credit. DigitalOcean has a comprehensive portfolio of cloud infrastructure so you and your teams can get back to doing what matters most: building apps that grow your business. With predictable pricing and robust product documentation, get support at every stage of growth with simple, powerful cloud computing. As a listener of the Sudo Show and a member of the Tux Digital community, you can get started for free. In fact, it's better than free, because DigitalOcean is giving you a $100 credit when you sign up at do.co/tux2022. We want to thank DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode of the Sudo Show. Hey, Bill, thanks for coming on to talk about virtualization with me.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
There's been a lot of news over the last, it's probably been a year since some of the changes in both proprietary and some open source virtualization have occurred. Not calling anything out. Just decided to kind of bring this topic back for a quick episode, get into, what's new in the virtualization and a little bit in the container space, not at the Kubernetes level per se, a little bit at the Kubernetes level, but kind of getting down to basics and where it makes sense to use a container over a virtual machine and vice versa. Bill, I know you're a fan of Proxmox. You use it I believe you use it in your home lab.
Sure do.
I don't believe in the last episode, I really didn't talk about it. Everyone seems to talk about it. I mostly focused the conversation on Overt. That's my background. I've been using Overt since Red Hat acquired Kubernetes. Just for the listeners who may not be familiar with Proxmox, just describe it.
Proxmox is a KVM-based hypervisor that is built upon Debian. And one of the things that I really like about Proxmox is the interface and the install. The install is very straightforward. You download the Proxmox ISO, burn it to your media, follow a few basic prompts to set up what storage you would like to use for Proxmox. And then when the install is finished, you reboot the system into its environment, log into the web interface, and away you go. The simplicity of that website makes it very attractive for me to show it not only to the people that I work with, but also to my clients and say, hey, there's another alternative out there for you if you are not interested in using VMware or Hyper-V. And look how elegant this looks. The other thing that I really like about Proxmox is it's very easy to set up advanced networking, multiple bridges, multiple VLANs. It's also very easy to set up different backend storage options such as Gluster, Ceph, ZFS, and many others that may appeal to you. Another feature about Proxmox that I really like about it versus other hypervisors is it does have some backup features built in to the web interface.
Proxmox is essentially that easy button. It is ubiquitous in home labs. It's if you just need a quick solution, plug and play, it is essentially there. More advanced, more enterprise class features. I know some of them are there, but I haven't used Proxmox in years. Seeing others for enterprise class type virtualization looking more towards XCP NG, which is not KVM based, but actually Zen server based.
So I actually have two hosts at home. One is running XCP-NG and one is running Proxmox. One of the people that I work with is a huge fan of XCP-NG and really insisted that I install it on a machine and kick the tires on it. A couple of the features of XCP-NG that I really like are that it has more backup options than Proxmox does, but I feel like the interface is not as polished as Proxmox, and you need to run a VM or another machine as the XOA or the Zen orchestrator appliance in order to be able to have a web interface or use some of the more advanced features. For me, I started off using a CentOS machine running VMware 2.0 as a binary application. And then when that stopped working, I needed to find something else that was just as easy to use, which is why I gravitated towards Proxmox. I am a fan of many types of hypervisors. I've been using virtual machines since 1997, and I love being able to spin something up quickly and then shut it down or pick it up and move it somewhere else. XCP-NG, I feel like could have more potential if it was given a bit of additional love.
I used to work on Zen server many years ago, actually specifically just Zen, like the Zen based hypervisors actually are based on SUSE. This is many years ago. They were fine. It worked. I mean, the overall container is QEMU, but there's still a conversion process if you decide to move it to a KVM host. At least there used to be. I haven't done a Zen to KVM conversion in quite some time. It may not be the case anymore. Probably just a QCOW move and away you go. I know Zen at one point required a guest agent, so the guest could have paravirtualization functions that it needed. That I don't remember if that's still the case or not, but that the portability is for me it's so attractive about KVM, because I can use an overt VM on a standalone KVM host. I can use a standalone KVM VM on Proxmox, etc. I can even now take those into KubeVirt, and that's just based on KVM.
I think one of the features of KVM that matters is that portability, and having it available on a wide variety of hardware platforms is rather important. If you look at the advent of the AMD EPYC processors and some of the new stuff that Intel is doing, people are picking and choosing different types of hardware for either price point or need. And a lot of what it made people gravitate towards Zen early on, I think, was the performance over KVM. And as processors have gotten faster and faster, and we've built out better and better hypervisors, that overhead of running KVM matters less and less.
And even then, KVM has gotten a lot of those paravirtualization functions as well that Zen has, being able to use the paravirtualized capabilities around network cards, graphics, etc. So yeah, that overhead is gone, more or less. Thing is, for me, the big thing with KVM is that it's been adopted. In terms of paid market share, yeah, obviously VMware is the clear winner there. But if you look at the overall market share of where KVM is in whether that's unpaid infrastructure or look at the cloud providers, almost every single cloud provider is using KVM. So it's getting the most development. It's getting the it's getting the latest features and functionality that people expect from a hypervisor. And it's moving into the container space, whether if we're talking, like I mentioned earlier, KubeVirt. KubeVirt utilizes KVM, whether if you're talking pure upstream KubeVirt or Harvester from SUSE. We can talk about that in a minute. Or OpenShift virtualization, which integrates KubeVirt into OpenShift. Yeah, KVM has just become ubiquitous. It is more or less the industry standard for hypervisors, minus like the enterprise virtualization. That space is more or less owned by VMware. Yeah, I think they have 70% market share in that space. It's no contest.
We'll even look at the development that has gone into KVM and Cockpit together. You can basically fire off a very nice set of virtual machines through the Cockpit interface. It's very intuitive. And unfortunately, you don't see that with Zen, where you see it with KVM. But that means that companies like Red Hat, who have adopted the Cockpit standard of managing machines, have that ability to play with KVM based VMs very easily.
And Cockpit can do some really fun things that I think are pretty fun, like move a VM from one host to another that doesn't share storage. That's something that it's just doing a bit for bit copy. The fact that I can just do it inside the interface, give it the URI of the target host I want it to go to, and it moves over. That's awesome. Cockpit as a virtualization interface evolved so quickly. In fact, I've actually replaced Overt in my home lab. I'm pretty famous for using Overt in my home lab. I have completely migrated off of Overt to standalone KVM, a Fedora host with Cockpit. It handles everything I need these days. I can do snapshots. I can do PCI pass-through, quickly create new VMs through the interface, because it will just download the ISO, or I can give it a kickstart target right in the VM creation window. For me, it's a huge time saver, makes automation much easier. Over, I could do a lot of automation, but I was dealing more with the Over API. I was not, and creating VMs inside the interface. Now less intuitive than it is in Cockpit. Cockpit is, I can't harp on it enough. I think it's awesome.
Well, let me ask you this. With that setup that you have, are there certain Ansible playbooks that you're able to create that integrate with your system?
Yeah, I can just use libvirt. The libvirt APIs, and that's all Cockpit's doing. It's utilizing the libvirt APIs to create, start, and stop VMs. Actually, for creating VMs, it's actually utilizing a bunch of tooling from the libguestfs project. For example, when I go and create a VM and I say I just want to create a Fedora 36 VM, it will actually go and download Fedora 36, or I think when this releases, Fedora 37 will be either released or releasing the following week. So it would, in that case, it would download Fedora 37 or 36, whatever, and automatically configure a minimal install. And that's using libguestfs, specifically the virt install capability. So that virt install uses a kickstart. I believe I'm pretty sure it's a kickstart file. That's pretty standard. It's just like pretty minimal. It just installs a minimal footprint of Fedora or RHEL or any other supported distribution inside of virt install. Pretty sure it also supports Debian-based distributions, and pass the a root password or admin user and its password, and you're done. You can also pass through Cloud Init scripts if you want to use Cloud Init. I personally prefer to just do kickstarts to configure everything the way I like it. That's just been my preference. Cloud Init definitely has its place in like an OpenStack environment or in the public cloud, but I personally just prefer to do kickstarts. cloning a VM, for example, it takes about a minute. It takes about 2.5 minutes to do a kickstart install on my local network.
Talk about a time saver.
Yeah, it's not a huge time save between the two. I just prefer to do the kickstart build. Bill, I know one of the things that you brought up with Proxmox is how easy it is to handle the backups. Like it's all integrated into the UI. That's one of probably the big thing that's lacking for me. I don't ever see something like that coming into the UI, but the way I handle that, I have an Ansible playbook. It does a snapshot of my VMs and I copy the deltas all through an Ansible playbook, which I'm planning on publishing my entire collection of Ansible playbooks that I use.
Looking forward to seeing that. Now for me, what I actually do is I don't run my VMs locally on my hypervisor. I have an NFS share set up on my NAS over 10 gig, and I use the built-in snapshotting function of the NAS to handle those backups for me. And the reason why I do that is because the only way that Proxmox will back up its VMs is all or nothing if you're using the single Proxmox host. Proxmox does have its own backup server, which is designed to run on another piece of bare metal as the backup destination. And I can see that being usable in a disaster recovery environment, but for my intents and purposes at home, it's a bit much. So having the NAS available as my storage host, where I can take BTRFS snapshots and then manipulate that share however I want, tends to work the best for me.
Yeah, I've thought about just doing the ButterFS snapshots myself, because that's where all my VMs are running on the same host as the hypervisor. I don't need shared storage because I'm not doing multiple hosts anymore. I used to do hyper-converged with Overt, so Overt plus Gluster. So I don't have that luxury anymore of utilizing Gluster's capabilities for handling snapshots and the backup interface in Overt. So I kind of had to recreate that myself, but that's I'm okay with that at this point.
I know that XCP-ng does support snapshot, full, delta, differential, incremental, disaster recovery built into its Zen Orchestrator appliance. And I think that's a really nice feature to have baked into the hypervisor. It's the one thing that I wish Cockpit had baked in. One
of the things I wish that XCP-ng had was an easy way of setting up a hyper-converged infrastructure. Right now, the only two open source hyper-convert, I guess three. I'll include the three that can do it out of the box is Overt. Overt's still around, and so I'll include it. Harvester. If you're not familiar with Harvester, I mentioned it earlier. It's a KubeVirt-based solution, but it uses Longhorn for the storage. Longhorn is a software-defined storage solution mostly focused on block storage for containers, originally developed by Rancher, and then OpenShift virtualization, which is installed along with an OpenShift cluster, typically utilizing Ceph plus Rook and Nuba for its storage capabilities, but mostly using the Ceph capabilities, obviously, for block. So that's really, those are, as far as I'm aware, the only three pure play hyper-converged solutions, unless Proxmox can now do like Ceph or Gluster.
It can do Ceph or Gluster out of the box.
But can it do it on the same node?
Sure.
That's the only thing I'm not sure on. Okay. And well, maybe a fourth there. That's nice to see, because right now the only ones are proprietary. You have Nutanix, VMware with vSAN. I guess you can use Nutanix for free. When I downloaded the Nutanix Community Edition for some research for work, I think it was about 2 years old, the ISO that I got. So I don't know if it's still doing the Community Edition or not. But then again, that's still not an open source solution. I digress on that. Since we brought up Kubernetes-based solutions, something that makes VMs look more like containers in some regards with in terms of containerization, I've been doing a lot more thinking of when is the best time to use a VM or a container. One of the things I personally try not to do is lifting and shifting. If something's working on a particular platform, I try not to move it unless I'm like I just did. Like I'm shutting down a hardware just because it's several years old and it's not really working out anymore. I've been thinking about when to best use containers. So I've been utilizing Podman a lot more lately. So I don't know, Bill, if you've been using containers more, whether in your day job or in home lab. What's been your approach to this? For me, it's mostly been new applications. Like in some cases, I may not be using Podman. I'm probably using Docker or something that is orchestrating the containers. Like, for example, I'm using Home Assistant, and Home Assistant has its own distribution and its own way of handling the container management on the Raspberry Pi. So it's using Docker. But that for me, that was a new-ish application. It's just running on a bare metal Pi, and a few other things that I've been thinking about moving to containers, or just because it might make more sense, like my file syncing solution, or using OnlyOffice. So OnlyOffice is running in a container, partially because I just took the container file and tweaked it a bit to work with Podman, and boom, off to the races. What's been your approach to that if you've been looking at containers?
I will openly admit right here, right now on this show, that containers and I are not friends. I have had a mixed journey with containerization platforms. For me, containerization technology is a punching bag that likes to hit me back twice as hard as I hit it. So my greatest success with containers has been Docker and Portainer, because being a very visual person, I see where things kind of connect and work together and where they don't. I like what Podman offers. I like what Podman can do integrating with Kubernetes, a much more seamless transfer or migration into Kubernetes. But where I fell down with Podman was, again, going back to Cockpit, trying to create a whole pod with multiple containers in it, which unfortunately wasn't available at the time. In my day job, because I work for a managed services provider that is mainly Microsoft focused, I don't really interface with containers, except when I'm trying to set up different open source projects in a responsible manner. What I have learned along the way is that not all container files are built equally, and not all will play nice as they were meant to. So I won't name the project here, but I have been rolling out an open source project at a few of my schools, trying to use it in a containerized environment. It simply would not work. I ended up having to build it in a VM, monolithic on its own. And that's the way I've had success with it. It incorporates into our backup software and backup structure, and I feel comfortable knowing that the data that's in that system is intact.
I've been doing kind of like a best of both worlds type of thing here. In some ways,
why not use the right tool for the job?
Yeah. So, in this case, like with Podman, there's a feature called Podman Machines. Now, what does Podman Machines do for you? It spins up a Fedora CoreOS virtual machine running Podman. That's where you run your Podman containers. So I've been kind of doing both. I've been doing like right there locally on the metal, or I'm using Podman Machines that will then run my containers, mostly for development purposes, or I want to just test something really quick without it having any other impact anywhere else. I have more storage allocated in my virtualization pool than I do in my container pool. My container pool actually uses less because just the nature of containers uses less storage, because I'm not installing a full host. So I'm able to do a bit more with Podman Machines. So Podman Machines kind of gives you the because you can interact with it through Versh. So thus you can interact with it in Cockpit. So you can snapshot it if you need to. You can roll it back. There's all kinds of stuff you can still do. Maybe not recommended. So then you can dip your toe, do some tests, then do it somewhere else. I've been doing a lot with Podman machines. One of the things that's been very attractive to me, especially recently, there were some things I didn't know about Podman. I've been utilizing Podman the way I used to utilize Docker. I just would start up a container and go, just let it go. Podman has some capabilities that I didn't know were there. For example, you can generate systemd files to start up your container and also do some changes into systemd to automatically update container images.
That's pretty slick.
Yeah. The other one that I didn't realize you could do is this awesome command called kubectl. I discovered this sometime last year, but I really didn't mess with it until recently. And this allows you to take Kubernetes YAML and run it directly. So you could take a Kubernetes application and run it on Podman. To me, that was magic in some ways. For me, it was better than Docker Compose, only because I'm starting to see more applications not shipping a Docker Compose file. They're shipping the ability to run it on Kubernetes. That's been my journey lately with containers, is learning this, because as I start thinking about replacing things or putting things in containers because it makes more sense, because I'm redeploying it. Like if I don't do lift and shifts. I'm redeploying applications in many regards. It's stuff that's the way I recommend it to my customers. It's what I recommend. So I kind of am doing what I preach instead of doing that lift and shift move. It's definitely made things more fun. I actually have to rethink the way things are. As much as I like virtual machines, I actually think, and I don't think virtualization is going anywhere anytime soon. But the architecture decisions in companies, and thus the architecture decisions we make for our home labs, it's containerization. So understanding how to make a containerized application work, or just taking an existing application and making it a containerized application, you're rethinking how it all is put together, because you're not just spinning up a virtual machine now and putting your database on it and the application. You're spinning up a Postgres container and taking putting that application in a container and connecting those two things, whether that's over a network or just on the local Podman network on a single host. So you have to rethink the way you're doing these things. Or maybe that doesn't make sense for everyone, especially in a home lab. Not saying that's what you should do, but as things evolve at our jobs, typically, that's how our home labs evolve appropriately.
Well, I go back to my first home lab, which was a 25U rack that was sitting by the side of a parking lot waiting for a nice home. And what containerization has done is it's allowed me to answer a conundrum that I had 15 years ago, which was, okay, I've got these 4 hosts and I want to run 10 lamp appliances. Where do I run the database versus the web application? Should I put all of the databases in one VM and then use something like PHP MyAdmin to manage those databases? Or should I have standalone VMs with the database embedded inside of it? And the beautiful thing about containers is that it answers those questions for you in a way that you can do it however you want, but you have more flexibility and resource preservation at the same time.
I can already hear some of the people objecting. Brandon, they've had virtualization plus containers for a long time. It's called OpenVZ or Proxmox with LXC. All right, I can already hear that. The only reason why I have not brought those up, they're not ubiquitous. They're used in niche use cases. Cool if it works for you. It's just something that is not there. It's stuff that we don't run across in the real world. I know it's out there. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. What made containers ubiquitous was Docker, and now Podman and Docker and Kubernetes.
I do run some containers in LXC on my prox host. And what I like about it is that I have an easy ability to change the IP address of the container on my bridged network if I want to, very easily. Where that can be difficult if you're not familiar with Docker or Podman networking concepts and commands.
The networking concepts, well, in Podman are more closely related to Kubernetes. But yeah, it is more difficult because in the Kubernetes world, you want to give a container an external interface. You need to use Multis. For those who aren't familiar, Multis is essentially attaches a virtual interface to a container, so it can have its own have an external IP. That's essentially what it does. Also makes it easier for you to do like network acceleration capabilities that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. Yeah, there's a lot more steps. That's what's being used in the real world. Bill, thanks for jumping on and hanging out with me today and talking about virtualization and containers.
Always happy to join you. It's a great time being in the Sudo show. I learn something every time I'm here.
Yeah, hopefully we can get Neil on the next one. You two are supposed to interrogate me at some point.
Oh, we are actively working on the plan to interrogate Brandon. We have an amazing intro. I don't want to give anything away, but we're going to have a lot of fun with it. It'll be great to turn the tables on you for once.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. All the links for the projects mentioned, even some that we did not, will be in the show notes. And if really they just didn't come up in natural conversation, they'll be in the show notes if you're interested in them. Looking forward to catching everyone on the next episode. Thanks for listening to the Sudo Show, where business meets open source.